I live alone. Every night, thieves prowl around my ranch. I need a man to protect me, the widow told the stranger, who had stopped to ask her for water. The sun was dying behind the hills when Serafina Villalobos heard horse hooves approaching along the dirt road. For a single instant, an instant that lasted only as long as a heartbeat, she thought they were finally coming for her. She was standing at the gate of her ranch, a fence made of old, twisted wooden posts that she herself had straightened so many times with her bare hands. In her hand, she held a clay jug filled with water she had drawn from the well just moments before. The sky was on fire. The entire horizon was a burning ember spilling over the pastures, over the windmill spinning slowly, and over the few remaining animals grazing amidst the long afternoon shadows. It was the most beautiful hour of the day for the swallows, but also the one that terrified her the most. Because after that light came the night, and with the night came them. Serafina was 42 years old and had been living alone for 3 years on that ranch, which had belonged to her husband, and before him to his father, and before him to his grandfather. 3 generations of men had built up that land on nothing but sweat. And now, she was all that was left. Just her. A woman with hardened hands, with black hair beginning to fill with silver threads tied back in a loose bun, and an ache in her bones that sleep could no longer soothe, mostly because she hadn't truly slept in weeks. The hoofbeats grew closer. Serafina pressed the jug against her chest and squinted against the glare of the sun. A silhouette on horseback appeared at the end of the road, cut out against the fire in the sky. A lone man, his hat pulled low and his shoulders slouched from fatigue, riding a chestnut horse whose legs were caked in dust. It looked as if they both came from nowhere, from a place without a name, dragging miles upon miles of road behind them. Serafina's heart raced. Her first instinct was the one life had beaten into her, to retreat, get inside the house, and bolt the door. A strange man on horseback, arriving at the exact hour when the world runs out of witnesses. In other times, she would have run. But something kept her pinned to the spot. Perhaps it was the way the man approached, without haste, without stealth, his head bowed and his body defeated, like someone who no longer even had the energy to do harm. Perhaps it was her own exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that sometimes weighs heavier than fear. Or perhaps it was God, who knows exactly how to put people in your path right when you need them. The rider saw her by the gate and gently pulled the reins. The chestnut came to a halt a few paces from her, snorting, its chest heaving with exhaustion. The man raised 2 fingers to the brim of his hat in an old-fashioned gesture, a sign of respect that almost no one showed anymore. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said. His voice was hoarse, worn out, as if he hadn't used it in days. "I don't mean to trouble you. I've come a long way and my animal is dying of thirst. Would you be so kind as to let me draw a little water from your well? For him, and for me." Serafina looked at him. She really looked at him, the way a person looks at a man when their life depends on reading him right. His face was weathered by the sun, covered in a few days' stubble, and his dark brown eyes were sunken with exhaustion. They weren't the eyes of a bad person. She had seen the eyes of bad people, she had seen them very up close in recent months. These were different. These were the eyes of someone who had lost something and had never found it again. Without a word, Serafina took a step forward and held out the clay jug. "Here," she said. "Freshly drawn. Start with yourself. I'll take care of the animal." The man seemed taken aback. He hesitated for a second, as if he wasn't used to being offered anything without having to ask twice. Then, he dismounted with the slow, rigid movements of a battered man, and stepped closer. As he took the jug, his fingers brushed against hers for just a fleeting second. Serafina noticed his hands were rough and large, working hands, hands that knew what it was to grip a shovel, a lasso, and the reins of life when life gets wild. He drank. He drank slowly at first, and then greedily, closing his eyes. When he finished, he wiped the back of his hand across his mouth and returned the jug with a nod of his head. "May God repay you, ma'am. You have no idea what this means after a whole day under the sun." And that was when Serafina did it. She hadn't planned it. She wasn't a woman of sudden impulses. For 3 years, she had measured every word, every gesture, and every person who crossed her path, because a widow alone in the countryside cannot afford the luxury of making a mistake. And yet, there, with the sun dying at their backs and this stranger standing before her, empty jug in hand. Something broke inside her. Something that had been tightly knotted in her throat for weeks suddenly let go. Before she could think better of it, before a lifetime of caution could stop her, the words were already out. "I live alone," she said. The men looked at her. "I live alone," she repeated, feeling her voice tremble. She hated that it trembled, but she couldn't stop it now. "There is no one else on this ranch but me. My husband died 3 years ago, and I've been carrying this on my shoulders ever since. And for the past few weeks..." She swallowed hard. "For the past few weeks, thieves have been coming every night. They come under the cover of darkness and steal my cattle. They've already taken 9 head of cattle. 9. I go out with my shotgun and fire into the air and scream, but I am just one woman and they are many. One of these nights, they are going to realize there is no one here to defend me, and then..." Her voice cracked. "Then, I don't know what will happen to me." The silence that followed was massive. The windmill groaned as it turned. A cow lowed in the distance. The sky was fading minute by minute. Serafina wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, ashamed of having said so much, ashamed of showing herself so weak before a stranger. But it was already said. And so, with the little dignity she had left, using the firmest voice she could find within all the trembling, she spoke the words that had truly been choking her for weeks. "I need a man to protect me, even if it's just for a few days. I don't have much to offer, but I have a room where you can sleep, hot meals, and I would pay you whatever I can. You look like a hard-working man, and I just can't do this alone anymore." The stranger remained silent for a long time. He looked over her shoulder at the ranch, the humble house with its tiled porch, the windmill, the pastures, and the few remaining cattle scattered in the deepening twilight. Then he looked back at her. In those sunken brown eyes, Serafina thought she saw something pass by, an old pain, a memory, as if the word protect had touched a wound he believed had healed. "My name is Nicanor, ma'am," he finally said in a low voice. "And it's been a long time since I've had anyone to protect." He didn't explicitly say yes, but he didn't get back on his horse and leave either. And Serafina, who hadn't let anyone into her life for 3 years, knew at that very moment, without knowing how she knew, that this tired man, who had stopped for nothing more than a jug of water, was going to stay. Nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again at Las Golondrinas. To understand why Serafina Villalobos, a woman who had built high walls around her heart for 3 years, opened the door of her life to a stranger in less time than it takes for the sun to set, one must understand where she came from. One must understand what life had done to her. And above all, one must understand just how profoundly alone she truly was. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time, and to Serafina it now felt like a time from another life, almost belonging to another woman, when Las Golondrinas was a ranch full of noise and vitality. A time when she would wake up before dawn to the smell of coffee Camillo was boiling, and to his thick, deep voice singing out of tune as he pulled on his boots at the edge of the bed. Camillo was her husband, the man she had married when she was 20, and with whom she had shared nearly every single day for 19 years. Their only absences were during cattle drives, and their only arguments were the kind easily forgiven between people who truly love each other. Camillo was large, strong, quick to laugh, and possessed enormous hands. The townspeople used to say there wasn't a man in the entire region who understood animals better. He could calm a wild colt using nothing but his voice. He could look into a cow's eyes and know she was sick 3 days before she showed any symptoms. The livestock respected him, the land respected him. And Serafina loved him with that quiet, deep kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken often because it shows in 1,000 little everyday things, in the served plate, the mended shirt, the hand reaching out to find his in the darkness before falling asleep. They couldn't have children. That was the only great sorrow of those years. They tried, they prayed, they waited, but children never came. There were nights when Serafina wept in silence over it while Camillo slept. But he never blamed her. "We have each other," he would tell her, holding her close. "And this ranch is like our child. We take care of it, we make it grow, and when we are old, it will take care of us." She believed him, because when Camillo said things, everything seemed possible. Right up until that morning 3 years ago, which Serafina remembered with a sharp clarity that tortured her. Camillo had bought a breeding bull to improve the herd, a magnificent, fierce animal, and he was in the corral trying to break it in. She was inside the house, kneading bread. She heard the ranch hands shouting before she even understood what was happening. By the time she ran outside, her hands still covered in flour, it was already too late. The bull had charged. Camillo had slipped in the mud, and those 19 years of life together had ended in the time it takes a half-ton animal to charge a fallen man. He didn't suffer, they told her afterward, trying to console her. It was quick. As if that mattered. As if the speed of a tragedy could strip away any of its weight. She buried him on the hill alongside his parents, beneath a carob tree from which the entire ranch could be seen. From that day forward, Serafina was left alone. At first, the ranch hands stayed, but a ranch without a master falls apart, and a widow without money cannot pay wages. One by one, they left to seek work on other lands. Serafina didn't blame them, people have to eat. But every hand who left took a piece of the life she once had with them. Until one day, she realized she was completely alone on those vast lands with 60 head of cattle to care for, a windmill to repair, a well to maintain, and only 2 women's hands to do it all. And she did it. Heavens, did she do it? She learned to do things she never dreamed she would. She learned to herd cattle on horseback, to treat an infected wound on a cow's back, to haul heavy buckets of water, and to sleep with a shotgun right beside her bed. She rose before the sun and went to sleep long after it set, working like 3 men in between. Whenever exhaustion finally broke her, she would sit on the porch, look toward the hill where Camillo was buried, and speak to him in a low voice, as if he could hear her. Today was hard, old man, she would say, but I held on. I held on for one more day. The men from the town began to prowl around. Some came with good intentions, but most did not. They saw a lone widow with land and livestock and thought she was easy prey. One offered her marriage just 6 months after she was widowed. When she asked him why he wanted her, the man couldn't lie convincingly and ended up talking about the acreage of Las Golondrinas before he even mentioned her. Another was more direct, offering protection in exchange for things that made Serafina want to spit in his face. She drove them all away, the good and the bad alike, because she no longer knew how to tell them apart, and because a widow's heart is a locked place with far too many deadbolts. That was how she grew hard. That was how she learned to distrust. That was how she built her walls. And then, a few weeks ago, the thefts began. The first time, she thought she had miscounted. A single head of cattle was missing, but sometimes animals wander off into the ravine. The next day, 2 more were gone, and she found the heavy footprints of several men, the tracks of a cart, and the back pasture fence cut cleanly with something sharp. It wasn't a lost animal, it was people. People coming in the dead of night, in absolute silence, taking the little she had left in the world. She began to keep watch. She would sit on the porch with her shotgun crossed over her lap, fighting off sleep. When she heard noises out in the pastures, she would run out into the darkness, screaming and firing into the air. Some nights it worked and she scared them off. Other nights she arrived too late, finding only a cut fence and a smaller herd. They had stolen 9 head of cattle in total. 9. Every single one was a piece of her survival, because without livestock there was no way to make a living, and without a living, she would have to sell the ranch. Selling the ranch meant betraying Camillo, his father, his grandfather, and everyone who had sweated over that earth. But the livestock wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the fear, that cold fear that crept into her body when night fell and she realized she was alone, utterly alone, miles from the nearest town, with men who came a little closer every night. Sooner or later, they would realize there was no one there to defend her. A lone woman is a temptation to the unprincipled. Serafina knew this, and she knew her luck was running out. That was why, when that tired stranger stopped to ask for water with eyes that weren't those of a bad person, something inside her, something older and wiser than all her walls, told her it was now or never. Perhaps God had sent him. Perhaps it was her last chance not to die alone in the darkness of one of those nights. And that was why she spoke, that was why she asked a stranger to protect her. It wasn't weakness. It was the final act of bravery from a woman who had nothing left to lose. What Serafina didn't know yet, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this man carried a story just as broken as her own. Life, which is sometimes cruel for no reason, occasionally brings 2 shattered souls together precisely because. Animal, and he was in the corral trying to break it in. She was inside the house, kneading bread. She heard the ranch hands shouting before she even understood what was happening. By the time she ran outside, her hands still covered in flour, it was already too late. The bull had charged. Camillo had slipped in the mud, and those 19 years of life together had ended in the time it takes a half-ton animal to charge a fallen man. He didn't suffer, they told her afterward, trying to console her. It was quick. As if that mattered. As if the speed of a tragedy could strip away any of its weight. She buried him on the hill alongside his parents, beneath a carob tree from which the entire ranch could be seen. From that day forward, Serafina was left alone. At first, the ranch hands stayed, but a ranch without a master falls apart, and a widow without money cannot pay wages. One by one, they left to seek work on other lands. Serafina didn't blame them, people have to eat. But every hand who left took a piece of the life she once had with them. Until one day, she realized she was completely alone on those vast lands with 60 head of cattle to care for, a windmill to repair, a well to maintain, and only 2 women's hands to do it all. And she did it. Heavens, did she do it? She learned to do things she never dreamed she would. She learned to herd cattle on horseback, to treat an infected wound on a cow's back, to haul heavy buckets of water, and to sleep with a shotgun right beside her bed. She rose before the sun and went to sleep long after it set, working like 3 men in between. Whenever exhaustion finally broke her, she would sit on the porch, look toward the hill where Camilla was buried, and speak to him in a low voice, as if he could hear her. "Today was hard, old man," she would say, "but I held on. I held on for one more day." The men from the town began to prowl around. Some came with good intentions, but most did not. They saw a lone widow with land and livestock and thought she was easy prey. One offered her marriage just 6 months after she was widowed. When she asked him why he wanted her, the men couldn't lie convincingly and ended up talking about the acreage of Las Golondrinas before he even mentioned her. Another was more direct, offering protection in exchange for things that made Serafina want to spit in his face. She drove them all away, the good and the bad alike, because she no longer knew how to tell